Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video, we've got another season preview video here to discuss. In today's video, we're looking at the Minnesota Wild and the Winnipeg Jets. These two teams last year both made the playoffs. So we'll look at how I did this past year, how I did in the offseason, and my predictions for these two teams going forward. We'll touch on both these teams when we're past a little while coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here at the End-to-End Hockey channel. Before we begin this video, don't forget to like this video and subscribe below. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to do this for all of you guys, so if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. Don't forget to leave a comment. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers. Don't forget to stay tuned for videos coming out in the very near future. I'm sorry if there's any background noise. But in today's video, we've got another season preview video here to discuss. We've done a handful of these where past well. We're going back to the Central Division to look at two very interesting Central Division teams, and that's the Minnesota Wild and the Winnipeg Jets. So as usual, we'll look at how they did this past year. We'll look at their additions and subtractions in the offseason, their trades, their top 3 draft picks from the 2025 draft. We'll look at the offseason checklist I did in my offseason preview video, as well as my projected lineup, projected point total and predictions, and their offseason grade for this past season. So we'll start with the Minnesota Wild here. Last year was a pretty solid season for the Minnesota Wild. They had a record of 45, 30, and 7 for 97 points. That was good enough for 4th in the Central Division, 7th in the Western Conference, and 13th in the entire NHL. So they were a top 15 team, they were a top half team, top 5 team in the Central. They were able to make it as the first wildcard team in the Western Conference. So very good stuff there for Minnesota. They had a pretty solid season. Sort of tailed off a little bit as they got injured towards the end of the season, but all in all, we're a pretty solid team, almost hit the triple-digit mark. They had 225 goals for, 236 goals against. So they were a team who made the playoffs, who were actually in the minus category of the plus-minus system. So that's surprising. They were a minus 11, so very interesting note there. Going from being 225 for to 236 against to minus 11, so like not overly great stuff there from the Minnesota Wild, as they were definitely a minus team. Goal scoring and point scoring wise in the regular season for the Wild, Boldy led the team with 73 points, followed by Rossi, who had 60, and Kaprizov with 56. Boldy led the team with 27 goals, followed by Kaprizov, who had 25, and Rossi, who had 24. So very interesting note there. You can see how they weren't the best of goal scoring teams. Only 2 players hit 60 plus points. No one on that team hit the 30 goal mark. So very interesting note there. But you can see why the Wild definitely had some struggles offensive wise last year. This team wound up making the playoffs, as we just talked about. First wildcard team went to the Vegas Golden Knights in the first round of last year's playoffs, and they lost in 6 games. They actually had 2-1 lead, but lost games 4, 5, and 6 to fall in 6 games to the Vegas Golden Knights. So as much as they had some pretty good point totals from some of their players, it was not enough to get past Vegas. So very interesting note there. Point wise, Kaprizov led the team with 9 points in the playoffs, followed by Boldy, who had 7, and then goal scoring wise, Kaprizov led the team with 5 goals, followed by Boldy, who also had 5. So very interesting note there, as those 2 guys were the goal scoring leaders for the Minnesota Wild in the postseason. So Kaprizov and Boldy once again both had really good seasons in regular season and the postseason. It was just not enough to get the Wild past the Golden Knights in round 1. So very interesting note there. But those were their stats from last year. Next, going over to their offseason additions and subtractions. So this is a long list of additions and subtractions here. They added Nico Sturm from Florida, Tyler Pitlick from Boston, both in free agency, Vladimir Tarasenko in a trade from Detroit, Nicholas Aube-Kubel from the Rangers. They added Kierstead from Florida, both in free agency, Butler in a trade from Columbus, Peterson in free agency from Philly, and they also added 2 2025 4th round picks. They also lost Gustav Nyquist to Winnipeg. They lost Virgil Gaudreau in a trade to Seattle. They lost Brendan Gaudreau in a trade to Columbus, Justin Brazeau to Pittsburgh, Travis Boyd to Toronto, Devin Shore as UFA, Tyler Madden as UFA, Declan Tisham to Washington, Ryan O'Rourke as UFA, John Merrill as UFA, Marc-Andre Fleury, who retired, and a 2025 6th round pick that originally belonged to the Minnesota Wild. So all in all, some very interesting movement from the Minnesota Wild. They lose Marc-Andre Fleury. It's all right because they do have Wallstead, who could definitely fill in as like a NHL level goaltender. They add Cal Pearson for some depth at the goaltending position, so that's not overly bad for the Minnesota Wild. They lose Merrill, O'Rourke, and Chisholm. Merrill and Chisholm were pretty decent 3rd-pair defensemen last year, while O'Rourke was one of their top defensive prospects. They didn't qualify as an RFA, so very interesting there. They lost those guys. They added Cameron Butler, Matt Kierstead, both AHL level guys. Kierstead has had some call-up options in the past, so not very much movement on the defensive side. Offensive-wise, they lose Tyler Madden, Devin Shore, Travis Boyd, to some extent Brendan Gaudreau, all more AHL level guys. Gauntz and Boyd to some extent were call-up options. They also lose Justin Brazeau, Frederick Gaudreau, and Gustav Nyquist, who were also bomb six guys last year. They add Nicholas Aube-Kubel, Tyler Pitlick, Nico Sturm, and Vladimir Tarasenko. Pitlick and Aube-Kubel can be solid fourth liners, spares, and even AHL guys who are call-up options. Tarasenko is going to be a solid middle six forward. Sturm can be really solid fourth line center. So all in all, they make a lot of changes with their depth. They don't lose a whole bunch of depth, like maybe they lose a tiny bit, but all in all, I don't think it's an overly bad change up here for the Minnesota Wild, and I think they're pretty much same offensive-wise that they were last year. So very interesting note there, but those are the additions and subtractions from the Minnesota Wild. The Wild made 4 trades this past season. They acquired a 2025 fourth-round pick from Seattle in exchange for Frederick Gaudreau. They acquired a 2025 fourth-round pick as well as Chase Prisky from Washington in exchange for 2025 sixth-round pick, as well as Declan Chisholm. They acquired Cameron Butler from the Columbus Blue Jackets for Brendan Gauntz, and then they acquired Vladimir Tarasenko from the Detroit Red Wings for future considerations. So 4 very interesting trades there from Minnesota. Similar on the lore side of things, but I do like the Tarasenko edition, and I do think there were a couple of other ones that were decent there from Minnesota. So very interesting note there. Their top 3 draft picks in the 2025 draft were as follows. So they had second round pick, 52nd overall, and took right shot defenseman Hallquist. They had 2 fourth round picks, 102nd and 121st overall, and they took center Bennick as well as right winger Amadovsky with the 4th round picks. Those were their top 3 draft picks from the 2025 draft. Very, very good picks there from the Minnesota Wild. The right shot defenseman, I think, eventually could wind up being like a solid second, third pair defenseman. The 2 forwards they took in the 4th round could eventually challenge for bottom 6 roles. So very interesting note there, but those are some very interesting top 3 draft picks from the Minnesota Wild. Next, going over to the 5 things I said in the offseason preview video I said they should do in the offseason to get better and improve for this upcoming season. So the first thing I said on my offseason checklist was to add a top 6 forward. At this current point in time, they haven't done that. I know they've had some decent forwards, but Tarasenko, in my opinion, Aube-Kubel, Sturm, they're not top 6 forwards. They're at best third liners. So in my opinion, at this current point in time, they didn't add anyone to improve and bolster their top 6, which was one of my top priorities for Minnesota Wild in the offseason. So that is something that is going to have to be given an X on my checklist. They didn't accomplish that. The second thing I said on my offseason checklist was to add some bottom 6 veterans, and they did that. While Tarasenko, Sturm, and Aube-Kubel aren't top 6 forwards, they are completely bottom 6 forwards. And I think adding those guys really to help round out the depth on that team was a smart move there from Minnesota. So while they didn't do my first priority, which was to add top 6 forward, they completely completed my second priority, which was to add some bottom 6 help. The third thing that this team should do is to sign Kirill Kaprizov to a long-term extension. At current point in time, it has not happened yet. We've heard some rumblings about him getting like an 8x16 deal. Hasn't happened yet. Maybe it will by the time this hits YouTube. Maybe it will a couple of weeks from now. We'll have to wait and see. But at current point in time, Kaprizov has not been extended, so that's an X on my checklist. The fourth thing I said this team should do in the offseason checklist video was to decide if Wallstedt or someone else would be the backup for the Minnesota Wild. And I feel like they have decided that. They haven't signed anyone. Cal Pearson's most likely going to be a third stringer, so I feel like they will go into the season with a Gustafsson-Wallstedt tandem. So I know the loss of Marc-Andre Fleury is not overly good, but I do think Wallstedt can fill in well as the backup, so I do like this sort of a move there from the Wild, and they did complete the checklist as they have figured out the backup for this upcoming season. And the fifth thing I said this team should do is to give some more younger defensemen some opportunities at the NHL level, such as Zeev Buium, Carson Lambos, and Ryan O'Rourke. Now, they didn't qualify O'Rourke, and he left as UFA, so nothing really to talk about him, but I think Buium is definitely going to be an NHL level defenseman this upcoming season. I wouldn't be surprised if younger guys like a Lambos or a Juracek got small opportunities at the NHL level as well. So I do think, while they do have some really solid defensemen, I do think guys like Lambos, like Juracek, like Buium will all have shots to make the NHL roster. So I think to some extent they did complete that as well. So they completed 2 or 3 things on my checklist, but they never had a top 6 forward, and they still haven't signed Kaprizov. So very interesting note there. Next, I went over to my projected lineup for the Minnesota Wild for the 2025-2026 season. So as it sits right now in the 25-26 season, the top unit would be Kirill Kaprizov with Joel Eriksson Ek and Daniela Yurov. The second unit would be Boldy with Rossi and Zuccarello. The third unit unit would be Ogren, Hartman, and Foligno, and the fourth unit would be Trenton with Sturm and Tarasenko. You have the top D pair of Middleton and Faber, the second D pair of Brody and Juracek, and the third D pair of Bugim and Spurgeon. You have Gustafsson being the starter, Wallstedt being the backup, and you have Johansson, Aube-Kubel, and Bogosian as your three spares. And that would be a really decent roster there for the Wild. It'll probably be one of the best defenses in the entire NHL. Goaltending wise, not too bad. And they do have some pretty decent depth in the forward group. So all in all, that's not a bad lineup there from the Minnesota Wild. Next, going over to my projections for the Minnesota Wild for the upcoming 2025-2026 season. So at this current point in time, I have the Wild maybe doing a little bit better than other people expect. Like, I think the Wild were on pace to hit way more last year than 97 points had guys like Kaprizov, Brodin, Eriksson, etc. been healthy. So I think if they can stay relatively healthy, they can get the Kaprizov situation worked out with, and they don't have that as a distraction going into the season. I think this Wild team is poised to go far this offseason. I have the Wild finishing with a record of 50, 24, and 8 for 108 points, being the number one team in the Central Division. Yes, that's a very bold claim. In a division that has Colorado, that has Dallas, and a couple of really other solid young up-and-coming teams. I have the Minnesota Wild winning the Central Division. I personally feel this team is poised to take a major step forward in the regular season this upcoming season. So very interesting note there, but I do have the Minnesota Wild being the first team in the Central Division in my predictions. And lastly, going over to my off-season grade. So if you look at this team, they did lose a little bit of depth from the forward group on the defensive end. They lose a solid backup, Marc-Andre Fleury. They add Cal Peterson. They add some depth AHL defensemen. They also add a couple of AHL level forwards, some guys who can help in the bottom six. They didn't really do a whole bunch of really big flashy things this offseason, so I'm going to give them a C- rating. It's another team to give a C- rating. Like, there are a whole bunch of teams in the NHL who had some average off seasons, and I think at this point in time a C- rating is really warranted for the sort of off season the Minnesota Wild had. So that's my opinion on the Minnesota Wild at this current point in time. Next, let's go over to the Winnipeg Jets. So going over to the Winnipeg Jets, the Jets had a pretty solid season last year, probably the best regular season last year because they were the President's Trophy winners. They finished with a record of 56, 22, and 4 for 116 points. That was good enough for first in the Central Division, first in the Western Conference, and first in the entire NHL, hence them winning the President's Trophy. So I think you can say it was a pretty dang good season there, regular season wise at least, for the Winnipeg Jets last year. They wound up finishing with 275 goals for, only 190 goals against. They give the goals against under 200. That's insane. They had a plus 85 goal differential. So the Jets were one of the best plus minus teams in the entire NHL last year. So they had a great season. Goal scoring, point scoring rise in the regular season. Connor led the team with 97 points, followed by Scheifele who had 87 and Ehlers who had 63. Goal scoring wise, Kyle Connor led the team with 41 goals. Scheifele was second with 39. Velarde with third was 27. So very interesting note there. So once again, Connor, Scheifele leading this team, both hit 30 plus goals, both hit 80 plus points. Really solid stuff there. There was a little bit of a drop off after those two, but still really solid seasons, especially from Connor and Scheifele. But you can see why this team was one of the best goal scoring teams in the entire NHL. They made the playoffs as the best team in the Western Conference, took on the second wildcard team, St. Louis Blues, and because of home power, winning all 4 games at home, the Jets would wind up taking down St. Louis in 7 games, 4-3 in round 1. However, they would lose their home magic, and they lost to the Dallas Stars in 6 games in round 2. So even though they were the best team in the regular season, they were not the best team in the playoffs. So very interesting note there. In the playoffs, Scheifele, Ehlers, Connor were tied for the team leading goal scoring with 5 goals. Kyle Connor led the team with 17 points. Scheifele was second with 11. So even in the postseason, like, Scheifele and Connor were the point drivers all season long for the Winnipeg Jets. And while I was able to get them past round 1 this year, just not able enough to get past round 2. So very interesting note there. Those were the stats from last year. Next, going over to their offseason additions and subtractions. Not long a list here, definitely not as long as Minnesota's. If you look at their additions, they added Jonathan Toews, who went into last season as a UFA, was sort of having problems with his health. He recovered from that. He signed a 1-year deal in Winnipeg. They signed Tanner Pearson from Vegas, Cole Koepke from Boston, Goose Nyquist from Minnesota, Florida, Walker Duehr from San Jose, Phil Giuseppe from Vancouver, Samuel Fagemo from Los Angeles, and Kale Clague from Buffalo, all in free agency. Meanwhile, they lose Nikolai Ehlers to Carolina. That was a bad blow. They also lose Mason Appleton to Detroit. They lose Axel Johnson for Jalby to UFA status, Brandon Tanev to Seattle, Dominic Tornado to Chicago, Dylan Coughlin to Vegas, and Chris Driedger as a UFA. So they lose a whole bunch of players to UFA status. So very interesting note there. If we break this all down in the Nets, defensive-wise, not much change. Driedger with a third stringer that they swapped for Kakinen at the trade deadline. Like, they lose him. They could probably bring in someone internally who could be a third stringer, so that's not a bad loss. Lose Coughlin, add Clague. Like, those are solid call-up options. Clague has had some call-up options in the past anyway, so it's not too much of a change. Meanwhile, they lose Ehlers, Appleton, Tanev, Jalby, and Tornado, and they add Giuseppe, Duehr, Nyquist, Koepke, Pearson, and Toews. Now, it depends on what sort of Toews you're getting. If this is Toews somewhat similar to what he was in Chicago, this was going to be a really solid second-line center addition for the Winnipeg Jets. Pearson, Koepke can play fourth-line minutes. Nyquist can definitely be a solid middle six thrower forward. And then you've got Duehr and Giuseppe, who could probably start at the AHL level and be call-up options. They lose Ehlers, who was one of their best point scorers last year, especially in the playoffs. Like, that's going to be a massive blow to that team. They also lose Mason Appleton, who's a solid middle six guy. They lose Brandon Tanev, who was acquired at the trade deadline, solid bottom six guy. They also lose Fajalbi. They lose Tornado, who are AHL level guys, call-up options. So all in all, if you look at what this Jets team did, it's not terrible. Like, I think the Ehlers loss really does outweigh any sort of additions they made, but it's not the worst offseason we've seen by any stretch of the imagination. So very interesting to note there. This Jets team has not made an offseason trade, even draft for draft pick swaps. The Jets have not made anything since the trade deadline last year, so there's no really trades to talk about here. Their top 3 draft picks from the 2025 draft are as follows. They have first round pick, 28th overall. They use it to select left shot defenseman Sasha Boumadouini. They also have third round pick, 92nd overall, used to select center prospect Martin, and they had a 5th round pick, 156th overall, and they used it to select left winger Kingsell. So I do think these are some really solid pickups here. Boumadini, I think eventually could be a really solid second, third pair defenseman. I think it was a steal at 28th overall in the first round, so that was a really solid pickup here. Martin, I think eventually could be a solid third, fourth line center in the Jets organization. Kingsell, I think eventually, who was a 5th round pick, could maybe challenge like a bottom 6 role in due time. So very interesting to know there, like, none of these guys are going to make the NHL roster this upcoming season, but I do think they made some pretty good picks, especially given the fact that the Jets were a team who didn't have an abundance of draft capital. So very interesting to note there. Next, going over to my offseason checklist for my offseason preview video. So as I mentioned in my preview video, there were 5 things that this team should do in the offseason to get better. The first thing I said this team should do is to add a second line center. I believe they have found that in Jonathan Toews. Now, this team has been looking for a second line center a lot. Toews played a whole bunch of seasons in Chicago, but he is from Winnipeg, so it's sort of like a homecoming for him. I think Toews can be, if he was completely healthy and looks similar to what he used to look like in Chicago, I think he's going to be a fantastic and stellar second line center addition for this Winnipeg Jets team. So I really do like this addition here for the Jets, and I do feel like they completed the top priority for me in my checklist, which was to add a second line center. My second priority was to either extend Ehlers or add a top 6 winger in free agency or a trade or whatever. They didn't do that. They didn't make any trades. The best addition besides Toews on the forward group was a guy like Gustav Nyquist, so it's not really going to help them a whole bunch. So I was really hoping they would add one more top 6 winger or keep Ehlers to sort of try and help them in their top 6. Well, I do think they really did do really good by adding Toews as their second line center. They didn't add a top 6 winger, which was one of my top priorities for his team, so that's an X on the checklist. The third thing I said this team should do is to extend both Cal Connor and Adam Lowry. They're both huge pieces of the Jets team. Lowry is a third line center, but also the team's captain. Connors being one of the best point and goal scoring drivers on the Jets forward group. I said they need to extend both these guys, preferably this offseason. Neither one has been extended. Both seems to be entering the final year of their deals this upcoming season in a month. So it'll be very interesting to note there. I think these two players both deserve to be extended by the Winnipeg Jets. As current point in time, hasn't happened, so very interesting to note there. The fourth thing that this team should do is to add some bottom 6 help. They did that. I do think Nyquist, Dewar to some extent, Giuseppe to some extent, as well as guys like Koepke and Pearson can all really fill bottom six roles at various points in the season. Giuseppe, Dewar more as call-up options, the other guys more as bottom six forwards, but I think those guys can all really do well in like bottom six roles, and that really does strengthen the Jets' depth, the bottom six position. So very interesting note there, but I really like those moves. The fifth thing I said this team should do is to consider moving Heinola or Stanley. They have a rather crowded blue line, and guys like Heinola and Stanley seem to be, in my opinion at least, the sort of odd man's out. Heinola has gone through an abundance of injury problems that has halted his development. While Stanley, well, he's been an alright player, he's not a consistent everyday third pair defenseman. So while I did say the Jets should move one or both of these two guys, they're both still on the roster. Both are still with the Winnipeg Jets, so that's not something that on my checklist they've completed. So they completed two things that were on my checklist, but they didn't complete three things, including extending Kyle Connor or Adam Lowry, which I think is one of the glaring problems with the Winnipeg Jets at this current point in time from my checklist. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Next, going over to my projected lineup for the Winnipeg Jets for the 2025-2026 season. So at this current point in time, here's my projected lineup. So in the top line, I have Kyle Connor with Mark Scheifele and Gabe Vilardi. I have the second line being Nyquist with Toews and Perfetti. The third line being Niederreiter with Namestnikov and Chibrikov. And the fourth line being Koepke with Baron. And I have Follow. Morrissey and DeMello is the first pair. Sandberg and Pionk is the second pair. Stanley and Chen is the third pair. Hellebuyck would start. Comrie would back up. Gustafsson, Pearson, Miller would be a three spares. Adam Lowry would start the season on injury reserve because of his current injury. And that would be a really decent roster. Like, even without Adam Lowry, who's a really solid third line center, that is a really deep forward group. It's a pretty solid defensive core, and you've got one of the best goalies in the league in Hellebuyck. Like, that is a pretty gosh dang good lineup there for the Winnipeg Jets. Next, going over to my projected point total for the Winnipeg Jets for 2025-2026 season. So at this current point in time, I have the Jets taking a little bit of a step back. Now, I said the exact same thing about the Jets last year. They completely proved me wrong. I said they were going to miss the playoffs, hit like the 80 to 85, maybe 90 point plateau. They wound up winning the President's Trophy and hitting 116 points after having, I think it was 108 point season the year prior. So I'm predicting them to go down again, but this time not as much. Like last year, I predicted them to miss the playoffs after having a pretty solid season the year prior. This year, I have them making the playoffs, but just not in the top three spot in the Central Division. I have them finishing with a record of 46, 31, and 5 for 97 points, being the first wildcard team in the Western Conference. So like I said, I still think they'll make the playoffs. They have a good enough team. Even if Hellebuyck has a little bit of a down season, he's not going to have like a completely blown season. Like, he's not going to have that sort of a jump back. But I do think that this Jets team's poised to do well and make the playoffs, just not be in a top three Central position. I think there are enough teams in the Central Division to get better this offseason that they'll probably bump the Winnipeg Jets out of a top three spot. However, I do think they will still easily make the playoffs. So that's my opinion on the Winnipeg Jets. While I don't think they'll win the President's Trophy again this year, I do think they are good enough to make the playoffs as a first wildcard team. So that's my predictions for the Jets. And next, going over to my off-season grades. And if I look at this team, I know the Ehlers loss hurts, and trust me, I think it'll definitely feel for the Winnipeg Jets. But I think they got a lot better on their depth side. I think adding Toews as a second-line center is going to be fantastic. I think all the little moves they made in the offseason weren't too bad, so I'm going to say that this Jets team had a C+ offseason. Like, I can't give them a B or A rating offseason if you lose Ehlers and you don't replace him and not go out and get a top six winger. Like, I can't say that for certain, but I definitely think they had a decent offseason. I think even though they lost Ehlers, they're still a pretty good team even without Ehlers. So that's why I'm giving them a C+ rating, and I think it's warranted for how the Jets did this offseason. So that's my thoughts on the Jets. That's my thoughts on the Wild. I would love to hear your guys' thoughts. Do you think that the Jets are poised to take a tiny step back, be a wildcard team? Or the Wild, the team is going to win the Central Division this year? Definitely your thoughts on all of that. Do you agree with that? Do you disagree with that? And I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on all other things that we're discussing in this video. That's all I'm going to talk for today. Remember to like this video, and if you're like to subscribe down below. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to for all of you guys. So if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. Don't forget to leave a comment. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers. Don't forget to stay tuned for more videos coming out in the very near future. I also do a blog to my news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that. So check that out. I'll link to that in the description below. Can't wait to see you guys all for next video. See you guys soon.